1948. I think it was in April, about around this time of year, but I think around April of 1948 I got out of the reserves. I was in the regular Navy from 1942 to 1946. And then they want to get people out of the service, and they allowed me to, since I had 4 years and it was a certain rate, I could apply for discharge, which I did. But the reason I did was I got hurt during the war, and I was in a hospital off and on. I just got out in 45, and I was down in Pensacola, Florida, and they transferred me to Memphis, Tennessee, and they thought I was going to be discharged, and I didn't know that. That's what they sent me to. I said, hey, I'm USN. You can't kick me out and tell me to do things I'm supposed to do. And they found I was USN, so they put me in the school over there. And then we were teaching reserves for what they call station keeper duty. And so when I got a chance to get out, I got out and rejoined the reserves and went back on active duty right away at Norfolk. And what the station keeper was just like being in the service, but except they couldn't transfer against your wishes except by declaration of war. I never heard of NACA until I got over Norfolk, and these guys came over for the weekend. We had guys here that were coming over there 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks out of the year for training, to keep up with training. And some of them were a little bit up in the chain, and some of them were engineers, and most of them all like that. And I knew more of them, so they kept begging me and my buddy to come over here and visit us. Well, we didn't know anything about the place. The first time I heard of NACA, I had no idea what it was all about. So my friend and I, we always had to work every weekend, but we got Monday and Tuesdays off. So my friend and I, we decided we'd come over and see what NACA was like. So we came over, and they told us to go to a certain building on the east side at a certain room, get a pass, so to speak. Didn't need a pass. They put us in there, and what it was the employment office. So we had to fill out an employment application. So I didn't want the job. I was happy where I was. So I put down no experience, and I put my Navy, my rank, and I didn't say kind of nothing about no experience. And I wasn't interested. Would I be willing to travel? I said, no, I wouldn't travel. And I put down there, at that time, I said, well, they won't hire me if I ask too big a salary. So I put down something like $3,000. That was a whole lot more than I was making, but it wasn't that much. I thought it was too much. So I got in to see, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he said, y'all go over west side at 12:30, see Mr. Buddy. Name was Mr. Buddy. So my buddy and I went over, and what he did, that's while we was on the road, he called Mr. Buddy and told him what we'd done, apparently. We walked up there, and he introduced himself, and took us through IRD. And when we did, all our friends came out of the cubby holes, shaking hands and kidding us and all that kind of stuff, And we got back to his office, and he said, excuse me just a minute. And he walked out of the office, and I guess about 5 or 10 minutes went by, and he came back in, didn't say a thing to us, reached in, pulled his desk out, pulled out the pay scale, and said, I'm prepared to pay you all this amount of money. I looked at it, and it was a whole lot more than I had put down. My buddy looked at me, and I looked at him, and we said, we'll think about it. He got back, and I told my wife about it at the time, and she wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't give me any kind of her desires, or what she thought, anything about it. And not knowing anything about NAC, it was going to be quite a decision. And I began to get terrible feelings in my stomach all as time was going by. So I'll never forget this. This other guy kind of talked like he was going. And me, they thought I was going to stay. because I was talking the opposite way. So I went to lunch one day, and he went home one day to his lunch. And I can imagine how I was eating lunch. He just told me, he says, "I'm not going," just like that. And I was eating at the ship service, and I thought, well, I'm going to go. When I did, it was like a weight just went off my shoulders. We got back, and he and I was working on something together. In walked the lieutenant who was in charge of the schools there. He said, "Jones said, Pelon says he's not going, so we figured you wasn't going. Hey, we withdrew your request too." I said, "No, I'm going." I turned around, "You not going?" He said, "No." So that's how I got over here. And that's about April, latter part of April, 1st of May of 1948. First thing I did, I helped them modify, and they got a radar that was used by the Army during World War II, and we modified it for our use and took it to Wallops to install it. That was my first trip to Wallops. And then after we got that done, they moved me down to television application section. That's the part I didn't care too much for, because all I did was just wired up missiles. They brought in some oscillators, we put them in there and wired them in, and that was it. It didn't need any particular education to do that. But in the meantime, though, I started school with UVA. They had a satellite over here at Shipyard. So anyway, then I worked down there for about 10 years. And about this time of year in 1958, after I'd done this first thing I'll tell you about, they moved me up to the area which did the work that you just see right there, which is what I enjoyed. And after that, I thoroughly enjoyed NASA. Now what it is, they had we had some little batteries that to charge them, you had to charge them with a certain current constantly for 20 hours. Well, there was no way to charge them except use a varactor and change and increase the voltage. The battery builds up, the current decreases, so you increase the voltage so the current stayed the same. That entailed that if you want a set of batteries on a Monday, the guy had to take them home or come back to work every often and turn that thing up. Well, that was a lot of inconvenience. So I came up with an idea, and I went into my assistant section head and presented it to him. "No," said, "it won't work." I said, "Why?" He said, "It's too simple." So I went back, and in between models, I had a period of time, maybe a day or so, that nothing to do. So I went around and grabbed all the stuff I could find and breadboard the thing up, and it worked. So I went in, instead of getting him, I got the section head, or the branch head. He came in, and I showed it to him, and he said, "Well, go ahead and finish it up." So when I got through, I had it so that you could program any time of the day, of any day of the week, for it to cut on and a time for it to cut off. So for an example, Friday, you put your number of batteries on, you program it to come on at sometime Sunday afternoon and cut off at 8 o'clock Monday morning. That was it. We built two of them, one for us here and one for Lops Island. And when the missiles come up, the little batteries had to be charged before they could be put in, and you don't want to charge them until just before you get ready to fire it or use it. So we had one here, so when we checked the missile out and everything, we have our batteries ready. Everything checked out normal, say, or didn't, we could tell the trouble. Then at Wallops, before they got ready to fire it, they wanted those batteries freshly charged. So that's what they were used for. And then as a result, they didn't have to pay anybody to stay overtime to charge them, or they didn't have to take them home and ruin their weekend. And after that, then they moved me upstairs to do the work I like to do. And that's what, the first thing I had to do was either I think it was that round model was the first job I had upstairs. And then the second one was that 30 megahertz beacon. And then it went on from there, just one thing after another. The people who worked on the island, their time began at what they call the mainland dock. And the time ended at the mainland dock. So that meant they rode a half hour to get to the island both ways, so they only worked 7 hours a day, but got paid for 8. But that's the way they had to make it because they didn't have any other way to get on the island at that time. And the top half of the island, on the north side of the island, was the Navy. The Navy used that for bombing practice during World War II. And we weren't allowed to go up there because they didn't know there was any more live ammunition up there. And I told you about this guy that took off, didn't tell anybody, and took off, gone a day because of bad weather. And we searched almost all night for that guy. And nobody would go north of the area because they're afraid of the live bombs. So the next day, when people came back to work, well, he came back with them. He'd gone up to Ocean City and had a day off. Didn't tell anybody. So he caught it. I mean, he caught it not from a wallop, but when he got back here, he was chewed up one side and down the other. I'll tell you that now. I was surprised they didn't fire him, but they didn't. When we were in NACA, I think we were a little more, I guess you say, I don't know if you say relaxed or what it was, but we used to do a lot of more entertaining ourselves, pulling tricks on each other, things like that. But when we became NASA, it seemed like that just completely disappeared and everybody became more and more serious. And we didn't do much of that anymore. I'll give you an example. Remember, oh, you don't remember, you're too young for that, but there used to be well, when I first came here, television, not many people had television. It wasn't available. But it became available during that period of time. And they finally got one up at Wallops Island. We went up to fire a missile one day. Well, when you went up to Wallops from Langley, you depend on staying at least 4, if not 5 days. So we went up for the week to go fire this missile. So the day that we were going to fire it, we had our lunch. We had an early dinner, that's what it was, because the fire was going to be done after sunset. I think it's that thing right there. And they had a program come on that was called Roadrunner and cartoons, Disney-type cartoons. And so it came time for that to be on. That's just we finished eating. We were supposed to go back down to work. Everybody stayed down and go. We watched those movies until it was over with, and then we went back to work. Nobody left there until that thing was over with. Now you don't see them on television. People don't like them, but well, we sure did. One day we came in, it was NACA, 12:30, and the electronics shop was, the building right across the street from our towards the sheet metal shop was. That was an electronic fabrication shop was up there in that, and a lot of the apprentices worked in there, and some of them worked with where I was working with. One morning we came in, and in a trash can there was a mouse. How it got in it, we don't know. So we boxed the mouse up, and we taped it up and all, and put in a few holes so it could air, and addressed it to one of the guys who worked in that shop over there. And here come a guy I know that picks up a mail, and he picks it up and he delivered it. So we didn't think about it. So lo and behold, about, I think at that time we said we were 8 to, I believe 4:30 was the time we got off. Anyway, about 3:30, 4 o'clock, here come a great big box back for us. Opened up, and they had taken plexiglass and made a little living room, a little bedroom, a bathroom, and the mouse was in there. And that's the way that's the way it was back in the NACA days. But so we had a lot of fun on that respect. I never forget one time we had a guy that we had a missile was laying out like this, and we instrumented it, and this guy came in who was engineering over it, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't care, somebody hollered, Coke time. Everybody would stop work and flip who's going to pay for the Cokes, and then we'd have a Coke. Well, this guy was dressed up like I am. He was there, so he tried to have a Coke with us. So I got my Coke and his and went over. I handed him a Coke because he went around just by the time his hands touched. I did that. He thought I dropped it. He jumped up and landed on top of the missile. Tore it. He messed up his clothes. Didn't hurt the missile though. People in electronics, they always, some reason or another, they always assigned them to me. And I just get, after a while, I began to get some, I thought some pretty good compliments. A guy come back and, Mr. Jones, well, first of all, he came over and was assigned to me. He never had any electronics, electrical, anything. And I would take a little time, show him some stuff and things like that, and let him get his hands into it and do a little calculations. He went back to school. Came back after that next 6 months and looked at me and said, Mr. Jones, said that 6 months I put to you, said that made that class so easy. The rest of the boys are having trouble, so I didn't have trouble with it. At the end of World War II, they came up with, I think, one of the best programs for the military that they devised. It was called the GI Bill. And in the GI Bill, you got out of the service and you didn't have a job. They give you $20 a week for 52 weeks. That day, that's all you needed to live on, $20 a week. Can you imagine a pack of cigarettes that cost 20 cents? Can you imagine that? A Coca-Cola for a nickel? Well, that's the way it was. Gasoline, 20 cents a gallon. Most expensive automobile that I can remember before World War II was a Cadillac Buick. That was around $1,500. Cheapest was around $700. People bought them. We didn't have automatic transmissions. We did have air conditioning though. That was if it was hot, you rolled the window down. If it was cold, you rolled the window up. But anyway, we get back to my story. So what they did is gave you $20 a week for 52 weeks. We used to call it a $20 a week, 52-20 club. That's what we used to call it. Then they had an educational program where they would pay all of your expenses to go to school. And the GIs took great advantage of that. And the apprentice program came under that. So a lot of GIs come in, NASA or NACA could pay them a low salary, but what they did was the program would add whatever you got from NASA up to what the maximum NASA man would make after you finished apprentice school. So, and every year that you passed, NASA would increase you, which means the government reduced, well, it's all government, but I mean theoretically would reduce it. When you graduated, then of course that ended the government subsidy, and also they would furnish you all your tools you needed. Another thing too they do in the GI Bill was they guaranteed you a low interest mortgage, no down payment. And what effectively they did, the government co-signed a note for me. So it didn't cost them any money unless they foreclosed on them, which not many vets did that. As a result, what did it do for the country? The building boom started. Factories had to make furniture for those houses. And our economy just went just like that. And it didn't cost the taxpayer anything because they just said on paper, we'll guarantee it. And that's it. I'll never forget one time we had a missile. I'm trying to think it might be that thing there. We had every spot they could have had been taken up with instruments. And they forgot to make provisions for a rate of roll, which would tell them how fast the thing is spinning. And I happened to come by and they were looking at it in the shop and they didn't know what to do. If they changed the missile to make room for the rate of roll, it's no longer the same missile. That's no good. Nobody would give up the slot. We had 3 missiles going up and 3 missiles coming back down, with that ball being the last missile. Well, the way that thing was mounted, it was mounted on a thing like this that wrapped around the last missile, the fifth missile going up. And there was space in there. And I said, "Does this space get hot?" "No, why?" I said, "Can I have it?" They said, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Well, I'll put a beacon in there." You see that red beacon? So I put a beacon in there and get our antenna man to give me a dipole antenna pattern, and I'll tell you what the spin rate is. They said, "How to do that?" Well, I drew them a pattern of the energy transmitter was putting out, and it looks like a figure 8. So as the thing spin around, you get a loud signal. You got down to where the 8 was, you get no signal or a little signal. So I said, then you'll get a signal that's frequencies. The rate of roll is half the frequency that you pick up. And they bought it. They grabbed it right quick because that solved the problem. And that's the type of work I had to do. See, an instrument, they had to make a measurement, but they didn't know how to do it. I had to come up with a method of doing it. And then if it hadn't been tried, we built it up. Oh, well, we did that. We built that up. And it went through all the gyrations on Earth before we fired it. I got a good one to tell you. I think it's that same thing. It was one of the missiles. I can't remember that, but anyway, I think it was that one. You ever heard of Duncan McIver?
I heard that.
Well, he and I went down to Cape Hatteras, set up a receiving station. And the missile was going to be fired from Wallops to the southeast, which means the missile coming in is going to come in from the east, from the east towards the west. And it had to be clear, see, because we had photographic people down at Cocaina Beach, which was in the island north of Hatteras. And Duncan and I were down at right where the lighthouse was. We set up a station. We got down there on a Sunday, and Monday we went in there and we set the station up, ready to fire. And Tuesday night was a fire. The whole was be at night, because what we were trying to see is that when things came back in, we wanted to see it burning up. That's what the pictures were going to tell us. Well, I had a set of optical people down at Cocaina Beach, and I had another one up at Wallops Island. And we had radio contact between us and them, and everybody had radio contact. Well, their call letter was optical. I call them op-track, optical tracking. They call it op-track 1 was the one at Wallops, and op-track 2 was the one at Cocaina Beach. Well, on Tuesday, the weather closed in and rained. I think it rained just about the entire week. And on the weekend, it quit raining, but it was still overcast on a Sunday. I'll never forget, a guy came in, I was getting ready to go into a service station or something on the beach, on the Hatteras. He asked me, "Can you tell me where Hatteras, the city, some city on Hatteras Island is?" I said, "Which way did you come?" "It came that way." I said, "It must be that way, because there's only one road on the island." So anyhow, Monday it cleared up pretty good, we thought, but the optical people couldn't see anything. It was cloudy down there. So before they closed out, and we had the control was called Wallops Plot. That was their call. Here comes op-track 2, this is Wallops Plot. Op-track 2 came back and said, "Wallops Plot is op-track 2, go ahead." Op-track 2 is Wallops Plot. "How's the weather down there?" He come back and said, "Oh, it's awful cloudy, can't see a thing." Then he said, "Well, we're secure for the day." That went on for a day or two. So finally one night, you ever heard of Echo? Okay. He came on, they couldn't see anything, it was quiet. It got dark down here. All of a sudden I heard this, "Op-track 2, this is op-track 1. Op-track 1 is op-track 2, go ahead. Op-track 2 is op-track 1. Echo's going to be coming over in a few minutes, see if we can get a picture of it." Off track 1, it's off track 2, okay. Then quiet. Well, Had was looking that way, but the echo was to the north of us, going to the north of us. So there was a lot of difference between the two areas. So anyway, Duncan and I got out of the trailer right quick and looked up, and sure enough, you could see the sun reflecting off the echo as it went on, and when it got back in the shadows, it went out. We ran back in and sit there and listen. Off track 2 is off track 1. Off track 1 is off track 2. Go ahead. Off track 2 is off track 1. Did you get a picture of echo? Off track 1 is off track 2. Got a good picture of echo. Off track 2, off track 1, 10-4. Okay. Roger out. A few seconds to off track 2. This is Wallace plot. Wallace plot's off track 2. Go ahead. How's the weather down there? Soaked in, can't see a thing. How did you get a picture of echo? We cracked up on that one. Not a lot of sounds after that. They knew why he couldn't get a picture, but that was made it for a good joke. And when I first went there, as I said, I was in that telemetering application section where I mounted instruments in these missiles. But these missiles were scale models of aircraft that different companies were making for either the Air Force or for civilian. And I would see what it looked like 5 years before you'd see it in the sky. And that was interesting as far as that goes. The one thing about that used to get me, though, was we had to cover every one of our models when a visitor was coming in, because they were competitors. And the other companies didn't want the competitors to see what they were doing. But if a Russian or some other guy come in that wasn't anything to do with aviation, we didn't have to cover them. We used to think that was awful. At that time, we were having trouble with Russia, And they didn't bother if Russians came through. But don't let the McDonald come in and look at what some of the others are like. And I told you, I think one of at secret room they made it. They didn't go all the way to the top with it, and they left the top part open. And I got in there without the key one day. Yeah. That cured them on that. They filled it on up after that. And it wasn't because of any schedule to be any kind of enemy, just because they didn't want to make sure that the competitors didn't see anything. It was an Air Force type of aircraft, highly secret. What little bit we did in the getting a man to the moon and back, you didn't realize you're doing it. I can quote one ride I was on. I remember when they first went up, before they went out, they came back in, and before they went to the moon, they came back in, they'd lose contact with the astronauts. And they were worried about that. They didn't know what caused it. Or if they did, they didn't. I think they knew what caused it, they didn't know how to solve it. And I got some of that stuff I worked with in trying to determine how to solve that problem. And it turned out all I have to do is throw a bucket of water out there and it would make it all right. But I think it turned out that it didn't bother them that they lost contact with such a small percentage of the time. I think that's what they finally concluded. But they were concerned about it for a while, right, man. We used to call that a RAM, a radio attenuation measurement. And that was the purpose of that, as I understand it. We had Duncan and I was out there, we set up a station out there at Lunar Landing. We had a firing one night from Wallops. And he and I was sitting there in the countdown, and all of a sudden said, T-1, lift off, and that's as far as they got. The missile went up and then turned over and fell back down. And We don't know what caused that, but I just remember that because Duncan and I was, what happened? What happened? What happened? And they finally told us that it was what happened there. We had another guy that I felt sorry for. He was new. Name was Sam Sokol. And he had an instrument on him. Played with Little Joe. That's another part of the experiment for astronauts going to the moon. And he was, I went up to Wallops Island, it was on the pad. He was making some measurements with a voltometer, and he hit his probes hit the wrong connection and prematurely fired it. He thought he was fired. But he knew what they knew, because I told him, I said, hey, you're in research. You expect things to happen like that. But he was worried to death. He thought he was going to get fired. He enjoyed it like it was. He was new on the job. He didn't know all the ins and outs. And we used to have a philosopher that said, if a guy messed up too much, you got him off the workbench and put him in the head of something, so he had to stay in the office. Keep him out of the way. When I first got married, I asked myself, so why in the world did she marry me? She didn't know anything about me, except when I dated her. And I didn't do that much because I had to go off to war. So I decided I'd try to live a life as if we was always on a date. So I got to work one day. Hey, they're going to have King Tut's exhibit at Washington for a day. I said, just for one day? He said, yeah. I got on the phone and called my wife. I said, honey, get ready, we're going to Washington. And I hung up. Got up there, and I knew she'd be ready to go. She'd always dressed like she could meet the president or the Queen of England anytime. She said, what are you going to Washington for? I said, see an antique show. She said, well, we don't need to go to Washington to see an antique show. I said, well, we'll have an out anyway. So I got to Washington. I couldn't park near the exhibit because it was so crowded, and I had to park about a block away. And we were walking down the walk past the building go into the front entrance. And I turned to go in the front entrance. I saw a sign up there. We're going to see King Tut's exhibit. I said, I can't think of anything any more antique than this. It's 3,000 years old. So that's what we did. What you did. And I enjoyed what they call a RadScat, which is radio scatterometer. We were bouncing signals off the ocean, and the way the backscatter came back, we could tell you what the wind velocity was and what direction the wind was blowing. And that's what was on, we put that on Skylab, or rather, it was put on Skylab. I don't think we did it, but we put it on Skylab. And my wife and I went up to Washington one day, and I said, let's go into Smithsonian Institute. I hadn't been into the aerospace section. We did, and lo and behold, I had a Skylab hanging from the ceiling. And I was able to show my wife where my instrument was right there on the Skylab. That was a unique and very interesting adventure. So I told him, I said, see, I did do something. I retired on the last day of May of 1980, 32 years, and that's over 35 years ago. And I thoroughly enjoyed NASA. It was just always something different. You had to figure out something different. It was a whole lot more than I was making, but it wasn't that much. I thought it was too much. So I got in to see, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he said, y'all go over west side at 12:30. See Mr. Buddy. Name was Mr. Buddy. So my buddy and I went over. What he did, that's while we was on the road, he called Mr. Buddy and told him what we'd done, apparently. We walked up there, and he introduced himself, and took us through IRD. And when we did, all our friends came out of the cubby holes, shaking our hands and kidding us and all that kind of stuff, you know. And we got back to his office, and he said, excuse me just a minute. And he walked out of the office, and I guess about 5 or 10 minutes went by, and he came back in, didn't say a thing to us, reached in, pulled his desk out, pulled out the pay scale, and said, "I'm prepared to pay all this amount of money." I looked at it, and it was a whole lot more than I had put down. My buddy looked at me, and I looked at him. "1948. I think it was in April, about around this time of year, but I think around April of 1948 I got out of the reserves. I was in the regular Navy from 1942 to 1946. And then they wanted to get people out of the service, and they allowed me to, since I had 4 years and it was a certain rate, I could apply for discharge, which I did. But the reason I did was I got hurt during the war, and I was in a hospital off and on. I just got out in 45, yeah. And I was down in Pensacola, Florida, and they transferred me to Memphis, Tennessee, and visited us. Well, we didn't know anything about the place. The first time I heard of NACA, I had no idea what it was all about. So my friend and I, we always had to work every weekend, but we got Monday and Tuesdays off. So my friend and I, we decided we'd come over and see what NACA was like. So we came over, and they told us to go to a certain building on the east side at a certain room, get a pass, so to speak. Didn't need a pass. They put us in there, and what it was the employment office. So we had to fill out an employment application. So I didn't want the job. I was happy where I was. So I put down no experience, and I put my Navy, my rank, and I didn't say nothing about no experience. And I wasn't interested. Would I be willing to travel? I said, no, I wouldn't travel. And I put down there, at that time, I said, well, they won't hire me if I'm asked too big a salary, so I put down something like $3,000. When they thought I was going to be discharged, and I didn't know that. That's what they sent me to. I said, hey, I'm USN. You can't kick me out and tell me to do things I'm supposed to do. And they found I was USN, so they put me in the school over there. And then we were teaching reserves for what they call station keeper duty. And so when I got a chance to get out, I got out and rejoined the reserves and went back on active duty right away at Norfolk. And what the station keeper was just like being in the service, but except they couldn't transfer against your wishes except by declaration of war. I never heard of NACA until I got over Norfolk, and these guys came over for the weekend. We had guys here that were coming over there 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks out of the year for training, to keep up with training. And some of them were a little bit up in the chain, and some of them were engineers, and most of them all like that. And I knew more of them, so they kept begging me and my buddy to come over here, and we'll say, we'll think about it. He got back, and I told my wife about it at the time. She wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't give me any kind of her desires, or what she thought, anything about it. And not knowing anything about NAC, it was going to be quite a decision. And I began to get terrible feelings in my stomach all as time was going by. So I'll never forget this. This other guy kind of talked like he was going. And me, they thought I was going to stay because I was talking the opposite way. So I went to lunch one day, and he went home one day to his lunch. And I can imagine how I was eating lunch. He just told me, he says, I'm not going, just like that. And I was eating at the ship service, and I thought, well, I'm going to go. When I did, it looked like a weight just went off my shoulders. We got back, and he and I was working on something together. In walked the lieutenant who was in charge of the schools then. He said, Jones said, Pilon says he's not going, so we